Hi, I'm Steve Carlson. I want to discuss our Constitution and the state of our country in higher education at this time, after we have deliberately elected a man because of his race with the backing of the Democratic Party. A discussion of racial equity. To address this, I want to discuss two university episodes that many of us have seen in the last few days. But today's Washington Post lists with approval racial tension and protests on campuses across the country, including Yale, University of Missouri, UCLA, Black Bruins Matter, University of Michigan, University of Oklahoma, and Arizona State. That's Janelle Ross, whom I've already contacted to discuss her work. The first episode is a woman who is a Yale student and her YouTube confrontation with a university professor, Nicholas Christakis, a Yale professor of psychology and Silliman College's master. That's a school at Yale, Silliman College. There's a debate over free speech, academic expression, and her idea of the need for what would be a kind of revolutionary change, especially in education. The professor says, if you don't like a costume someone is wearing, look away, or tell them you are offended. Talk to each other. Free speech and the ability to tolerate offense are the hallmarks of a free and open society. He will probably want to reconsider telling them to tell costume wearers they are offended after seeing this black student screaming at him because supposedly his idea minimized the concerns of students of color. They demanded he step down as master at Silliman College. The other incident is a discussion with the University of Missouri. This has been a hot spot caused by Obama and Holder and their encouragement of insurrection and attacks on police in Ferguson, which have also brought in members and supporters of ISIS, who are looking to spark a murderous revolution in the country, as well as to establish their leadership in their Arab world. Of course, we want to keep this limited enough so it will not endanger many more people than it already has. Even the leader of the FBI has said that the kind of rhetoric, racial and anti-police rhetoric coming out of Barack Obama's mouth and his administration is causing a rise in crime. It's a very courageous statement by the director and one that everybody can obviously see is true. People don't even know what authority is or their need for restraint. Now, all of this has a kind of race politics basis. That needs to be clearly understood. And I don't want to say it's one-sided. The country was created so people could live in freedom and have due process of law, which necessarily includes equal opportunity. But freedom and due process must be maintained or those goals cannot be achieved. And that's what's at stake now, not just in this election. It is in the existence of this nation. And our character as a society can change very quickly, much more quickly than we've seen even during these horrendous times. And so now is the time when we need to draw on our Constitution and our education to sustain us. So to look at these two cases, I want to start with the case of the University of Missouri and then discuss the case at Yale. These are not legal cases. These are events and circumstances which reflect the prism of race in our society. For race is and always has been a prism in America because of the nature of some of our institutions. We had our abhorrent institution of slavery as it evolved into a race-based slavery. It did not start that way. It started with the practices of two very different societies, the Western European and West African, which collided. And also a racial prism because of the surrounding territory. As the young nation took root and expanded, there was always a relationship with the American Indians, who basically were friends of the white men. But they were friends of two different types of white men to begin with. The French and their claims to the New World, which are still there in Canada, you can see them. To cite Wikipedia, Louis XV ceded New France in America to Spain and Great Britain at the conclusion of the 7 Years' War in 1763. Well, we call that the French and Indian Wars. And the British and Western Europeans were allied with other Indians who eventually founded the Constitution, but not until that great French and Indian War, really the French and British War, using Indians as proxies. And it was that war which caused our revolution to explode with the heavy burdens placed on the American colonies because of the demand of the British king to pay taxes to pay for that war, the French and Indian War in the colonies. And the center could not hold. And the other racial prism is with yet another European power, with the Spanish, who also continued their claims to land. And as I said, as this country expanded, and then it got to the point where some might have used the words manifest destiny as a tool of propaganda, and maybe even as an article of faith for some, that we were destined to expand to the Pacific. But the plain fact is that the Spanish and the Mexican government, which represented them, the remnants of that Western power, had no just claims into the Northern Hemisphere. They had no just claims, and it's plain that the Mexican-American War was triggered not by racism, but by the attempts of the American settlers to integrate with and coexist with other indigenous peoples, which some may call the Chicanos, who extended their friendship in the Mexican state of Texas, north of what we now call Texas. And because of the various indigenous peoples, this has always been viewed through a kind of racial prism. And today, what you see in the media is a polemic against the European on terms of race, who do not bother to examine the roots of American society. To begin then with the University of Missouri president. There were some racial incidents, name-calling, a swastika. I think predictably enough, when you have a racial group burning down buildings, attacking police, attacking journalists, attacking citizens, and all with the backing of a person whom we trusted, Barack Obama, as if he believed in some kind of just and equal society. Obviously, he has no notion of what that might be. And because of this, a lot of the students, and maybe some people who aren't students, would have deeply felt feelings of hostility, and there were some expressions of those somewhere on that campus. But notably, various so-called students called out the president of the university because of events in Ferguson, which have nothing to do with the university. But people are so bonded with their ideas of what they're sure is right, that if he did not agree and rush to make public statements as president of the university, then all of a sudden they would attempt to rock that university, disrupting campus life, probably drawing in the same kind of song and dance we've got from Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch, his successor, and from Barack Obama. And this university president yielded. But obviously there is no basis for any kind of moral authority from a young man who attempts to kill a police officer. And those media who are so cowardly and dishonest that they will not report the truth of that event, which is proven by forensic evidence, and try to pretend that they can make some kind of revolution, those people do not deserve to be called the press. They can call themselves journalists if they want. Maybe they keep a journal. But they're not the press, because the free press in this country is cherished not because of them or their sex lives, boyfriends and girlfriends, the pot they smoke, but because they need to know how, the people need to know how to govern, the facts and information we need to retain our republic. That's what we need. And you and I on the internet are the press. The corporate media, the so-called journalists, the activists who involve themselves in every new thing and try to overthrow the government and our order to establish their new history, they're not the press, okay? They're activists, they're anarchists, and they may make money at it, just like you make money at professional wrestling, but they're not the press. Further, the students. And here we're going to get into education a little bit. I'm a longtime student leader in higher education. Wolf was asked, what was the systematic oppression? It's like, here's some student is going to come on the campus. They're going to give the president of the university a test to see if he passes. But first, they made a kind of revolutionary statement, which we've seen already with Hillary Clinton. When Hillary Clinton was confronted by these racist anarchists calling themselves the Only Lives That Matter and told her that she had to confess to her error, her and her husband's error in building prisons, for which they blamed her without proof of being guilty of mass incarceration. And so we begin to see the kind of events that occurred in the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, when anybody with eyeglasses was genocided, murdered as the enemy, to rid the entire country of an entire class. And this is what we see. These people who say only their lives matter, they have some special meaning that nobody else comprehends. We have the seeds of class genocide, not only a racial genocide, but a class genocide. And Hillary Clinton told them, this was on YouTube, that they had to do like the homosexuals did, and Hillary, to put together a program of legislation, which they didn't do, and then start to infiltrate the courts and overthrow and impose on everybody their baseless rules that are contrary to our law and Constitution. And the same case, in this case, in the University of Missouri, just like they did to Hillary Clinton, they tried to force President Wolf to admit, to confess, the error of white privilege. Obviously, white privilege is a farce. It is a farce for this reason. Everybody, and especially everybody in America, has privilege. Those football players at Missouri were privileged. Every student in the University of Missouri is privileged. You have the privilege of being an American. And if you don't understand that, you're ignorant. And these blacks and other activists who tried to force the president of the university to confess that he was guilty of white privilege and must give it up, again, another inkling of class genocide, which these kind of folks would force on the whole country. It's unacceptable. As far as the football team, well, they might be dumb jocks, but they should never have gone along with any of these organizers. And the best thing they could do is shut that football team down, to force them to become students, because this is a case in which a team has jeopardized the entire academic institution. It needs to be seriously reviewed. I understand they don't like putting so much effort into sports, doing so much for their institution and getting nothing in return but cheers, but this is no reason. If they think this is the reason they came to the university, then they're wrong. They came to be a student, and now they're deliberately teaming up with anarchists, these so-called lives matter folks, who decide whose lives matter and whose don't. Well, that's un-American. That's anti-American. It has been from the beginning. And Obama is carrying it out. He's un-American. He must cease his anti-American activity. He simply must. We have the self-governance to defend our country and to govern ourselves, and he is dead to us. He must carry out some duties until he is either removed by impeachment or the election comes and he leaves quietly and peacefully. But he is dead to America. He's dead to our concept of the Constitution and liberty. And he has to stop his leadership of this movement, which is the seeds of a movement of class genocide. But as I said, this is not one-sided. President Wolf went on. He was asked when he met with some people who named themselves according to a historical year, which for them, again, because they're so narcissistic and arrogant, and I would say anti-American, named themselves according to the year that they say they were allowed on that campus, 1950. He was foolish enough to meet with them for the cameras, perhaps not understanding the corrupt nature of our media, and that they would make this a media spectacle, combined with a bunch of people who can't play no ball in the first place, saying they'll stop playing ball, stop being Missouri students. And I say, fine. I hope they don't win another game in the season, and I don't care if they ever play football again in their lives. But these people started this over the question of whether Wolf could define systematic oppression. Well, what did this president say? He said, it means you believe that you cannot succeed. One of them, rather than listening to him, challenged him with their ignorance and arrogance and said, does that mean you're blaming us? They failed that one. No, he did not say he's blaming them. He's saying there's a problem that they believe they can't succeed, that's the oppression of that system that caused them to believe this. He took responsibility, but he should not have, but he did. And as he walked away from that, they had the cameras on him, and the ignorant, vile media that carried a false message that he was some kind of a supremacist, blaming them. Well, I'm going to get more into this. All these things combined, and he did, unfortunately, what the times of Obama required, which is to step aside for the good of the university. But now all of us must come together to fight back and push back against this kind of thuggish behavior from so-called students. Now let's go to the Yale case. If you look at the YouTube National Review posted video, you'll see yet another confrontation between a university professor and another so-called student, part of another thuggish clan, who screamed in his face, you could say with threatening gestures, said he was disgusting and he needed to resign. Another French Revolution class genocide type of scene in its recipient stages. Well, again, let's assume that despite her declarations that there could be no freedom of expression, let's assume that she was trying to conduct an inquiry into the truth in her own stubborn and even thuggish way, leading a mob of folks in front of the press like she's conducting a trial of him, some kind of French Revolution trial. And what did she say? "You are not here to establish an intellectual state," she said. "You're here to provide a home for us. And because you do such a poor job, these people who come to Yale, these minorities, are leaving. And you're responsible for that. You disgust me. You have to resign." All this happened over the incident of a Halloween mask statement from his wife. She's a child psychologist. However, if you know these types of so-called organizers, what they do is pick a certain pretext to start a confrontation. And this was just a pretext of this Halloween mask. What is the real issue? The race-based issue here? Well, obviously, she didn't even get to the part about white privilege. But she's someone who would say, basically, that he doesn't have the privilege to express his opinion being different than hers because that's a white privilege. And he must give up his white privilege. And he had a different point of view. He was defending his right to express it. And she was saying, well, that is an intellectual state. He was, okay, so what is an intellectual state? And what is a home? Well, I take it an intellectual state is exercising state power that establishes nothing but the intellect, somebody's intellectual pleasures, while others are suffering. And I can see that. That would not be desirable. I don't believe that any true intellectual could ever cherish such a thing. It's anti-American. And yet, even if that's what his view was, which I doubt, he was defending his right to express his opinion because it was his opinion. And it was protected because it was different than hers. Well, to me, that is pretty much the essence of freedom of expression, which is really based on freedom of political expression required to maintain a constitutional order. It would fail if people could not express their opinions in important issues of the day, because they're compelled to do that. They want to solve problems. They want to maintain the good of the state as a whole. And they also want to advance their own interests. It's a kind of a liberty. And this requires a certain intellectual space in which they can express their ideas. The home of intellectual freedom. And that very intellectual space is what protected not only her words and her manner of speaking, but even her physical threats and personal attacks, because I believe that they would fall within the bounds of the Supreme Court's jurisprudence on the First Amendment. That she's allowed to do that. That if we did not have those in another state, she might very well be arrested for threatening. But what she did advance was her own concerns. And we must listen to that concern no matter how it was presented. And that concern is that she believes she and the other students have a right to have a home at Yale University. It seems to me that she feels that her tenure as a student and her success, maybe she's skipping classes, and also many in her class or university who are from her background may not have a home. And maybe they're going to lose their student status because of failure. And we know there are large failure rates of minorities, including those who come on these scholarships to these universities. And so there is reason for concern. And it seems to me that she's asking for help. And I'm sure that at the University of Missouri, they are also asking for security and safety themselves, a learning environment, if you will, with people painting swastikas and yelling things at them. Of course, many people have been yelling things at the white people. And these guys have been dragging this onto the campus. And so even though they have done something to cause this situation of tension, still their concerns for security and safety and continuance in their course of studies so that they can pursue a more successful life outside the university, we need to honor that. And we need to listen to that. I do not agree with their threats or their attacks on people's assertions of the right to disagree. After all, this is just a debate. And obviously, these kinds of things are distracting from the goal of learning. Whatever it is, they're there to learn, and therein lies the problem. These university officials believe that they understand what these minority students need to learn, and I believe they are partially right. The minority students, apparently, many of these do not believe that they understand or have the authority to dictate to them what they have to learn and how to define their success or failure. So we have a question of the failed school, failed society, and the failures of those who do not attain success as somebody might define it. And so I agree that we need to take their concerns seriously. And I believe that that is precisely what the resigning president, Tim Wolf, has done at Missouri. And I believe that although it was not expressed by the teacher who was told how disgusting he was, and by implication his wife as well, who had made this statement about Halloween and children, that he would have said the same thing. He wants healing. He's a psychologist after all, and to take the student concerns seriously. And yet we cannot have so-called discussions when one side asserts the right to define that only their lives matter, as if it cannot be uttered that anyone else's lives matters. Nor can we have a dialogue where one side is refusing to listen and only yells. I think we've seen these in the past. We've gone through periods in the past in which campuses have felt that they were under attack and had to do something if they were to continue their mission. And even though these appear to be isolated instances at this time, I guess there's 5 of them reported in Washington Post today, there have not been any takeovers of buildings. They did surround the president's car, President Wolf, reminiscent of where they rocked and tipped people's cars over and attacked the people inside. But they weren't going to do that at homecoming with the university president. This is just a little inkling of those events, a little likeness. This is a threat. And the biggest threat is not only to the mission of the university, because I believe that will be defended. The universities are not going away. And we're all learning from this. There's a lot of YouTube threading, and we can have this discussion. But it's a threat to the equal opportunity of those students who have been extended the privilege of attending these schools. And it is a conditional privilege. It is conditioned on their successful pursuit of their course of studies. And we want their valid contributions. We do not want them, however, to disrupt the streets, the campuses, or the government, or our military ability to defend ourselves. And therefore, we must address this quickly. And so I have to laud the wisdom of President Wolf. It is not only that he stepped down, but he said he wants this event to be part of a healing, because that is what we need. I'm sure a leader like Wolf has many ways in which he can contribute in any other university. What we must condemn, however, are those persecutorial accusations of racism where they're not there, and where it is just an attempt to create a cause which can easily be won in one's own mind, in one's own thinking and language, and stops short of the dialogue which is necessary not only to learn in an academic environment, but for the existence of this republic. We need this in the elections. We need it in the newspapers. We need honesty on both sides. We need the journalistic media, self-loving, self-reporting journalistic media, to begin to look at the larger picture and what is at stake, and to realize that they are not any kind of new history. The new history is the establishment of this republic and this Constitution, which has not been aptly taught and is diluted in the artificial expressions of those who are getting their hands on the televisions and radios and microphones and everything else. So in conclusion, we must learn from these educational experiences, and we must learn now. I'm Steve Carlson. I'm running for president in 2016, and I approve this message. Thank you for listening.